Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a Bull Week edition of the Lashing Out Podcast and Indie Sports Now Network. My name's Jarrod Prugar. I'm alongside Kevin Quigley and Joe Smeltzer of NSN. Joe, first and foremost, you're in Atlanta. You're in the Peach State. What's that been like, and what have you been doing since you got down there?
Yeah, well, I got into the hotel probably about 8 last night. Hung around the media lounge a little bit. And then today it was a pretty long one. Started at 8:15 with It's actually kind of neat how they do it. So, they had a total of five people talking. The co-offensive coordinators Ty Howe and J1 Sider, and then. Well, seven people actually. The five players were Kane Wallace, Theo Johnson, Drew Aller, Nicholas Singleton, and Katron Allen. And they would have one group go out to the podium while the other was in breakout rooms, and then they would switch, if that makes sense. So I thought that was a pretty efficient way. It ensured that you'd get to spend quality, well, maybe not quality time, but be able to talk to everybody somewhat extensively. So that was pretty good. And then Ole Miss talked some of their defensive players, and Pete Golding got some good stuff there about Penn State's running game, and went to practice. Shuttle for that left about 12:15. Got to practice about 12:45. Practice windows about 15 minutes, and then after that, I walked around Atlanta for a bit, and then got to tour the College Football Hall of Fame with Penn State's players, some fellow media, and it's pretty cool. Hall of Famer Anthony Poindexter got to be there, which is pretty neat since there's a guy that's in the Hall of Fame, touring the Hall of Fame. And then Penn State did not win the Battle of Bowl Week, unfortunately. Fell two events short, I believe. They did win Family Feud, but ended up losing the overall tally. There's a little more stuff tomorrow. There's no practice tomorrow. Well, there's practice, but no open window. So really, it's just Penn State's pressers with offensive players and coaches, and Ole Miss with offensive players and coaches, and that's pretty much it for tomorrow. And then Friday is Franklin and Kiffin, and that's about it there. And yeah, we're pretty locked and loaded for Saturday.
That's right. Atlanta seems like a good time. I travel down there starting on Thursday, and then I'll be down there sometime mid-afternoon or the evening for the game itself. So I'm looking forward to experiencing life in Hotlanta. Now, have you seen the spread in the media room? Everybody wants to know what we're going to be eating, and more so, I want to know so that I can kind of plan accordingly.
Did they cater Magic City wings?
No, it's as you can imagine, it's a lot of Chick-fil-A, and they had steak for lunch.
For lunch,
yeah,
steak for lunch.
Yeah,
high dollar living.
It was pretty fantastic.
I am on my way. We are going now.
But yeah, that's I think to me, when I see steak, I kind of lose track of everything else. It's like, steak. Okay, like I don't know. Like put Brussels sprouts out there, I won't even know. So like if you got steak, like that's an A+. So
that's it. Joe Smeltzer's a one-man throw ride when he sees the snake or sees the steak. That's excellent. The players seem to be having fun. We'll get to the game here later on in the second segment. But, Bowl Week is a lot of fun for not just for the players and coaches. I mean, obviously there's business. Penn State left on Saturday and got there. So it's been a real kind of structured week for them. It's a normal week, which is exactly how James Franklin did it. I have a story out on NSN about his process and why that matters. You see that all the time, and you see that why there's one opt-out, and that was a guy that was injured, Chop Robinson. Yeah, don't get me wrong. It would be great to see Chop play. But we all know why that happens and how that happens. But to get guys like Olu Fashanu, guys like Kalen King to come back, play in the bowl game, Theo Johnson even, Daquan Hardy, guys like that to not even think about leaving just yet, play one final time in the blue and white and get into the bowl game and play one last time. I think that speaks volumes of what James Franklin has been able to do at Penn State in his tenure with the Nittany Lions.
Yeah, one question, Joe. Did Johnny Dixon practice?
No, he was not seen. That I'm sure that'll be addressed with Anthony Poindexter tomorrow. But Johnny, I don't even think he practiced at the media's viewing window in State College on Bowl Media Day. He wasn't seen at either of the two Bowl Week practices here, and I'm not certain he made the trip. I don't want to speculate, but Johnny has not been seen at practice, and that's a pretty good indicator that he has opted out. Nothing official yet, but Johnny's obviously not going to be back next season. He's out of eligibility. He's going to the Senior Bowl. He accepted that. But from the looks of it, he will not be playing Saturday. That's not official, but it looks like he has opted out.
So, I mean, Kalen King could come back next year. He didn't have the most stellar year, so he's a guy who probably could come back. But no Johnny and no Chop. So those are two guys out of eligibility, and really two opt-outs out of the NFL caliber roster that the Penn State has of draft eligible guys. For them to mostly be playing just shows just how much the game means to the team and to James Franklin's mission leading the team as well.
And the one player I think everybody was excited to see on the field is Trey Wallace. Trey Wallace comes back from injury. He, to me, was their number one receiver in a year where Penn State really didn't have a number one. He was the number one guy when he was healthy. And I think that is going to be a big factor come Saturday for Drew Aller and the Penn State offense.
Yeah, it definitely is, having Trey back and have him work with what has Andy been able to install. I know he's been on the sidelines. Ty Howell and Jaywan Sider are still leading this program, but Andy probably still has his thumb on the scale in some way, shape, or form. Maybe he has a couple plays drawn up for him, or just a play calling philosophy that's just hasn't been seen yet before. So it'll be interesting to get another weapon. I know Sider and Howell are more than capable of leading this team and leading this offense. And we saw it the last time we saw him against Michigan State a month ago. So it's just going to be what kind of impact does that have? But the new coordinators, it's to be determined.
Yeah, and Trey's going to be a big guy to watch because that's a guy that you're going to need next season. I know we can talk about the portal. Who are they going to get? Julian Fleming it's been 2 weeks since those crystal balls were forecasted, but still no official word on that commitment. I think you need at least 2 receivers out of the portal. They don't have any so far. They're going to get definitely at least one, but we'll see what they do. But Trey Wallace is a guy that's going to be back next season, and he's a guy you're going to need. He was really kind of had the year stolen from him. Started out that great game against West Virginia, and then got hurt against Delaware, I want to say, or maybe it's between week 2 and week 3, I think. But he basically ended up missing most of the year, and if he's healthy the whole season, that might change the outlook of the receivers slightly. I don't know how much it would have changed because the depth just wasn't there with the receiving core. We all know that, but part of that was because of Trey Wallace's absence. So if he can have a big game against Ole Miss, that's a big sign for 2024 because he's a guy that is going to be needed next year.
That's a really good point, Joe. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the coordinators, their interim tags, and what's to come in the Peach Bowl itself when we come back for the second segment of the Lasching Out Podcast on the Sports Now Network. Welcome back to the second segment of the Lasching Out Podcast on the Sports Now Network. There, Joe and Kevin. I am Jarrod. Gentlemen, there is a football game to be played. It is finally bowl week. There have been 16 practices or so between the end of the season and the game. Now it's time to talk the game. And I want to touch on Lane Kiffin's comments just a couple days ago. He mentioned how Penn State is such a wild card right now. And they're a wild card even with the same personnel essentially, but they're a wild card because they have co-interim coordinators on offense, but also an interim coordinator on defense. So they're not quite sure what's going to happen, or Ole Miss isn't quite sure what's going to happen. They can only speculate how things are going to go. Ty Howell and Jaywan Sider have had a month to put in their offense and put in their touches on things. They talked during the offensive coordinator's press conference on Wednesday about being able to put their things in and being able to scheme for the players rather than the play. And I think there is an immense amount of value in doing that. And that's something that obviously Mike Yurcich wasn't capable of doing for Penn State. And I think it showed in a big way. But now if you're able to kind of manipulate your offensive schemes around certain players, like Katron Allen, like Nick Singleton, like Keandre Lambert-Smith and Trey Wallace and Theo Johnson and Tyler Warren, life is not going to be bad for the Penn State offense if they're able to get things going on Saturday.
Certainly not. And if you listen to national media or you listen just to the Ole Miss media, if you go down that wormhole, it's that Penn State's offense isn't good. The strength is Penn State's defense versus Ole Miss's offense. But Penn State offense has the ultimate wild card. It's the ultimate mystery, and it's the ultimate advantage. Ole Miss has both of their coordinators. They kept them both intact. The film is there. All 12 games, 13 weeks of the season, they're on film. What Penn State is going to do on offense, there's only 2 weeks of film for it. Trey Wallace played in neither of those games. And how much offense can you install in 2 weeks with game prep? You can't do much, especially with the NCAA rules on how much practice time you get. So they've had a month to do it, like you said, and this offense could look completely different than what is on tape for the previous 12 games this season.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's kind of interesting the differences in how the offense is versus how the defense is in terms of changing coordinators. Because obviously the offensive coordinator was forced out of Penn State, which means that a lot needed to be changed with the offense. Defensively, I mean, Anthony Poindexter, it basically has a Maserati and can't crash it. Now, that's not demeaning towards Anthony Poindexter because he's a big reason the Penn State defense is a Maserati. You look at what the safeties have done over the past few seasons, and he was the co-defensive coordinator too, so he definitely had his fingerprints really all over what Penn State was able to do. But yeah, I think offensively is definitely going to be what to watch for. I think in Saturday's game, because who knows what they're going to change, as you said, Kevin. Against Michigan State, things worked really well. And what we saw against Michigan State, I think, was a lot different than what we saw with Mike Yurcich. But a colleague of mine, Ben Jones, brought up a good point during the Michigan State game. He basically said, I don't want to say diminishing the optimism, but kind of pumping the brakes by saying, well, Penn State was beating the crap out of bad teams under Mike Yurcich too, and Michigan State was definitely a bad team. Ole Miss is a very good team. So seeing what this offense can do with Drew Allar, with Ty Howard, Jalen Sutter calling the shots, against a team that can actually tackle and hit back, that's going to be interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what it looks like schematically, and the most interesting part is going to be how Drew Allar and everybody executes.
The benefit the Penn State offense has is that Andy Kotelnicki has been there since day one of bull prep. That, to me, I think is a big factor because, yeah, he is learning how Penn State does things. He's learning more about players and how they practice and how they do certain things and whatever. But he's a guy in that room that they can bounce ideas off of. Tom Allen just gets on board last week. I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. I think it's very similar. But they've been able to bounce those ideas off of Kotelnicki. He's been around a while now, as far as being around the program, which I think there's a good deal of value in that. So when you're able to provide that and you're able to handle that, I think that's a great situation offensively. And that's where, I mean, defense, you know what you're going to get for the Penn State defense. And you're right. Poindexter does have the keys to a very high-powered car in his garage. But in his defense, Ole Miss is a very potent offense. They're an SEC team that's going for their 11th win. There's a value in that. That's not easy for an SEC team such as Ole Miss. They've extended Kiffin. Kiffin has done a great job down there. They have a dog that retrieves teas, Juice Kiffin. Life's not too bad if you're a running Rebel.
Is Juice going to be at the Peach Bowl? I'm guessing he is.
I have no idea. But 11 wins for Ole Miss.
The dog lover me hope so.
11 wins for Ole Miss would be the first time in program history Ole Miss has never won 11 games before, ever. It would be Penn State also has a chance to go for 11 wins for the 5th time under James Franklin in 10 seasons. There's a
But
lot.
that's not enough for James Franklin. That's not enough to Penn State fans, right?
It's not. However, you have teams who are relatively unproven. They've beaten everybody but both of them. Penn State is 21-0 in the last 2 seasons against teams not named Michigan and Ohio State. Ole Miss, they're 10-0 against teams not named Alabama and Georgia. They lost to both of those. This is going to be a game that is program defining. The Ole Miss fan base, I've been deep in Ole Miss podcasts and Ole Miss beat writing and all this other stuff all day long. The Ole Miss fan base is absolutely buzzing about the number 1 ranked transfer portal recruiting class. And they're looking towards next year just the same way that Penn State's look towards this year and the way that we're going to be looking at Penn State next year. Both of these teams have a lot to play for. And I do still think it's advantage Penn State because they have the offensive advantage because of the wild card. And Penn State's defense is probably way more proven than Ole Miss's defense. And Ole Miss's offense, they put up 700 and some yards against LSU. But LSU's kind of had a porous defense this year. And Ole Miss also gave up 640 yards in that game as well. So it's going to be interesting to see Penn State's number 1 in total yards per play, sacks, tackles for loss, and number 3 in scoring. This is strength against strength, and Ole Miss's offense really crumbled against Georgia and really crumbled against Alabama. And they played Alabama the week after Alabama struggled against USF. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes, but both teams are building towards next year, and I think Ole Miss has a lot to build for, but Penn State, I mean, this is probably a playoff matchup next year.
Yeah, it's pretty fun to look at just all the intrigue in this game. You know, in this age, everybody looks at all but 2 bowl games with at least some form of cynicism because of opt-outs and now the transfer portal and all that. But you break down either side, Penn State could be the first team to win all 6 New Year's 6 bowl games. And as Franklin pointed out Tuesday, would be the only team to do that with how the playoff is changing next year. Has a chance to win 11 games back-to-back. Both teams have a chance to finish in the top 10. Both teams have good young quarterbacks that are going to be back next season. So building for the future there. And then, as you mentioned, Kevin, Ole Miss, first Ole Miss team ever it would be to win 11 games if it can beat Penn State. And both of these teams are really similar in that they've beaten everybody except the big dogs in the conference. Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss lost to them, beat everybody else. Penn State, we all know about Michigan and Ohio State. So I feel like I've said this so much, but it's one of the truest things about Penn State football is that there hasn't been any middle ground at all, really, the last 2 seasons. What I mean by that is Ole Miss is not a mid-level team. I'm not trying to say that, but what I mean by that is you're either playing a perennial college football playoff contender / participant in Ohio State or Michigan, or you're playing a team that you're expected to wipe the floor with. And you can't really impress anybody either way in that regard. But Penn State can impress people by winning this game, and they won't have to beat the number 1 team in the country in Michigan. They won't have to beat Ohio State and Columbus. They can beat a team that's more at their level, but impress people doing it, if that makes sense. And I think that'd be the biggest takeaway if Penn State wins the Peach Bowl is kind of like what happened with Utah last year, right? Utah was, I think, a fringe top team, and Penn State, I think it opened a lot of eyes. Obviously, you could argue how it was followed into the next season, but at that time, beating Utah was thought of as a big springboard into 2023, and I think Penn State beating Ole Miss will be a big springboard into 2024, and the same goes for Ole Miss too. So it's going to be a good one, and 2 charismatic coaches as well. That doesn't hurt.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good point. You know, you mentioned the coaches, and I think the way they go about things are very, very different, right? Lane Kiffin was out and about on Twitter all over this matchup. As soon as it came out, he tweeted at Chop Robinson, best of luck, thank God you're not playing, whatever. You know, and certain things like that. But, you know, there's mutual respect between the 2 coaches. And this is for James Franklin a way to get a win against its team, a top team in Ole Miss. It's a top 10 team, top 10 program right now. It's not Ohio State or Michigan, right? You know, we say it all the time about Ohio State, Michigan this, Michigan that, whatever. And we'll talk a little bit more about Michigan in the third segment and our friend Coach Harbaugh. But the fact of the matter is not many teams are beating either of those teams, James Franklin included. That's just the way that it is right now. You're in a historic era for both of those. But for Penn State to go out and be able to win the Peach Bowl, the sixth New Year's Six game, that would be the first program to do that. And this era of college football is not easy. College football is going to change next year with the 12-team playoff. We're going to be debating on teams that are the 13th and 14th ranked team. Why should they have gotten in? Rather than why did Florida State get snubbed and then 20 of their players enter the portal, or not enter the portal but opt out of the bowl game. So, you know, for this game, this is a great matchup. I think it's one of the better matchups, more even matchups of the New Year's Six, and that's not easy to do the way that things are. But for James Franklin and Lane Kiffin, they've done it differently, to say the least. But it works for each of them, and I think there's value in staying true to yourself and trusting that process, no matter who the coach is.
And James Franklin has a chance to win his fourth New Year's Six bowl game.
Mm-hmm.
Rose, Fiesta, Cotton, and now the Peach. That's a big accomplishment for him as well. So,
yeah, and he would have won every game he's played in too, because he lost the Rose Bowl to USC, but then he ended up winning the Rose Bowl. So,
right. No, and that's I think and we can sit here and debate like why don't they beat Michigan or beat Ohio State? Well, they're beating teams that they're also supposed to, right? Nobody's expecting them to go out and beat. Yeah, it's not great when you get thumped by them, but at the same time, going out there performing the way that they can perform against Ole Miss, potentially getting a win, will go a long way to springboard into the offseason and getting those 16 guys or 15 guys that that are in early enrollees on campus and get them into practicing, get them into that college lifestyle, that college atmosphere, and then go into the 2024 season knowing that you have an awesome opportunity to potentially host a playoff game at Beaver Stadium in December.
Yeah, and just to show how important it is, of all the New Year's Six bowls, this game probably has the least number of opt-outs. There's only 3 as of right now that we know of full game opt-outs. So it shows just how much there's buy-in to these individual programs and just how much it means and how committed these teams are to showing out and giving a good performance at the Peach Bowl. It's not going to be Ole Miss versus UCF in the Peach Bowl from a few years ago when they just kind of absolutely mailed it in and UCF goes on to claim the national championship that year. So,
well, they'll get me started on that.
Anyhow.
No, and I think that's a really, really good point. You know, we talk about these bowls all the time, and we talk about what's next. You know, my favorite, and we'll talk about this here in a little bit, but it's just one of those deals now where Penn State gets like even Saquon Barkley. Think about this. Saquon Barkley was a top 3 pick when he played at Penn State. He still played in the Fiesta Bowl. He played sparingly, but he still played, and they still won.
He played long enough to rip off what was it, an 81-yard run?
Yeah, against Chris Peterson's Washington team. You know, that was a game I was fortunate enough to be at. I'm fortunate this is my 3rd New Year's Six game. So there's a lot of value in that, both for media's sake and for program's sake. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the rest of the bowl games and even more about God knows what when we come back for the 3rd and final segment of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network.
All the things I saw today.
Welcome back to the 3rd and final segment of the Lashing Out Podcast on the Nittany Sports Now Network. I'm Jarrod. They are Kevin and Joe. Gentlemen, let's wrap up Penn State talk. Bold predictions. What do we got for this game?
So Cedric Johnson was the lone opt-out for Ole Miss. 40 tackles this year, 5.5 sacks. He's their primary pass rusher. 5.5 sacks was tied for the team lead. The second best defensive player for Ole Miss is a safety. Their defense is extremely mid, as the kids would say. Penn State's offense is going to be new look. It impressed against Michigan State. It was incredibly balanced, nearly 50%. It had 600 yards, 50% was through the air, 50% was on the ground, and remarkably balanced. Ole Miss got thumped by Georgia, 35 points late in the season. They're going to have something to prove. But Georgia showed that offense could be stopped. Ole Miss, if Ole Miss gets out hot, that's completely fine. Ole Miss scored on their first 2 possessions against Georgia, and I was like, oh boy, we have ourselves a game. Georgia went on to absolutely dog walk them. I think they forced like 4 straight 3-and-outs in the second half. Penn State's defense is probably better than Georgia's. If not, it's exactly the same. Probably a little bit more athletic, probably a little bit stronger front seven, especially at defensive end. The athletic linebackers in Abdul and Curtis Jacobs. Idisa Isaac plays defensive end. Curtis Jacobs and Abdul Carter could have absolute games at outside linebacker. I think they're going to have a lot of freedom under Poindexter. The Manny Diaz defense is still going to have the remnants. It's still going to be a lot of pressure. Can they upset Jackson Dart? Can they force him to have? He has like a 65% completion percentage this year. Can they force him into the low 60s? Can they force him into the 50s? If they put a lot of pressure on him, it's the absence of Johnny Dixon and the limited role of Kalen King probably doesn't play that big of a factor if he's has less than 2 seconds to throw. So I think Penn State gets it done. 31-17. The spread of the game, sorry, I beat that. Penn State 4.5-point favorites, over under of 48.5. And weather doesn't matter because it's a dome. So I am right at the under of 48 points. So 31-17 Penn State.
Yeah, I'll go 34-24. I think Penn State wins this game for a few reasons. One, James Franklin does not lose games in which he is favored in, which I'm pretty sure Penn State's still a slight favorite. And you have your exceptions, obviously. The 9 overtime game against Illinois, everybody will talk about. In a bowl game, the Kentucky Citrus Bowl will come up, but for the most part, especially over the past 2 years, if Penn State's favored to win, whether you're ranked, unranked, whatever, they're going to get it done. And I think they have that going for them. I think the fact that offensively, this is going to be your last chance to play with the play under Ty Howell and J1 Sider. Defensively, it's going to be I shouldn't say the only chance because he was the coordinator in the Outback Bowl 2 years ago, but it's going to be one of your only chances to perform with Anthony Poindexter calling the shots. I think both of those groups are going to be motivated. And I think, as we mentioned earlier, there's enough reasons to be motivated about this game to where you're not going to get a bad effort from Penn State. But I also think the stress of the regular season is kind of off, right? You're not worrying about being good enough to beat Michigan. You're not worrying about beating Ohio State. That's done. That's in the past. Whatever. It was a disappointment, but you can move on. And I think bowl games naturally have more of definitely this day and age, like kind of a free-flowing feel to it. I don't want to relax might be a strong word, but it's I think more fun for the players than the average game is. So yeah, I think Penn State has a lot going for it. I think that the offense has really kind of found itself over the past month. I'm not 100% about that yet because it was just Michigan State, but I really do think that the product is a lot better than it was during Mike Yurcich's tenure. And yeah, I just think the vibes are really good around this Penn State team. They have been really, and I don't want to say it's because Mike Yurcich got fired, but since Yurcich is removal, we'll just use that as like kind of a timestamp. Since after the Michigan game, things have been pretty relaxed. They've been playing good football, and I expect Penn State to continue to play good football. And Ole Miss, Jackson Dart, they'll have their moments, but Penn State's going to get it done in the end.
For me, I very much agree with both of you. I have them scoring 38 points. I typically have them on the higher end of the scoring train, but I've also got them allowing only about 17 to Ole Miss. I do think the Penn State defense continues to show up. Right now, only Johnny Dixon's questionable as far as what he's going to do, what's going on there. And there's probably a little bit of gamesmanship there with Franklin and company as well. But when you're only down Chop Robinson, they prove that, honestly, yes, Chop's a big deal, but they can play and have success without him. So there's that. But I do think it's going to be 38-17 Penn State when it's all said and done on Saturday afternoon, I should say, in Atlanta. But let's get to some other games. Obviously, our friend Jim Harbaugh is a treasure, man. Like, there's nothing I enjoy more than Jim Harbaugh talking to the media. Today, he was asked about the LA Chargers job, and it's one of those situations where, now it's one of those. He just skirts around it and it's like a NASCAR race. He's talking to Mike Tomlin, word suit the word race, and I think that's honestly one of the more impressive things for Harbaugh. But as we're talking, we're recording this. We probably should break some news. Joe, if you want to go ahead and talk about that, by all means, go for it.
Well, this isn't gonna rival Watergate or the White Bronco chase or any of that type of breaking news, but it's still news that Adisa Isaac will not be at Penn State next season. He's declared for the NFL draft, which isn't a surprise to anybody because he is very good and has been playing college football for 5 years. He will play in the Peach Bowl, so kind of a theme with Penn State's team is that guys are opting out, or excuse me, not opting out, but declaring for the draft. So Adisa Isaac will be there against Ole Miss. I actually think he already announced that beforehand, but he will not be at Penn State next season. He'll be in the NFL, and I think he can have a pretty solid career in that league.
Yeah, I mean, he's fast, he's quick, and he had an excellent season. So stock is at an all-time.
I'm sorry to cut you off, Kevin.
Stock is at an all-time high for Adisa Isaac. So, props to him for performing as well as he did this year, and best of luck next year in the draft. But
yeah. I honestly thought he had already declared for the draft. I kind of figured that this was going to be the last game for him, no matter what. But good for him, and going to the league. It's Saturday in itself is going to be great. It gets all started really with the New Year's Six, with the Cotton Bowl in Missouri and Ohio State. What Ohio State's going to do at quarterback with McCord. With Kyle McCord going to Syracuse. Not quite sure what that's going to do. That's down in Jerry World, the Palace in Dallas, if I do say so myself. Of course, that's the one Penn State New Year's Six game that I haven't and I didn't go to, solely because I elected to go to a basketball tournament when I was coaching basketball instead. But God forbid I would have gone to a game in my favorite stadium where my favorite NFL team plays. So I tend to kick myself for that one. Then Saturday, you got the Peach Bowl with Penn State and Ole Miss. Georgia and Florida State is the most intriguing bowl game to me outside of Penn State, Ole Miss, solely because Florida State has been hit hard, not just by opt-outs, but essentially they're opting out of the ACC, which I think is kind of crazy as well.
Yeah, Jarrod, you forgot about my boys. The Arizona Wildcats taking on Oklahoma tomorrow night. Alamo Bowl, going to be
How could I forget?
Big 2024 season coming up for my Wildcats. Looking forward to that. Ohio State, Missouri is going to be interesting. Devin Brown cannot throw a football, it doesn't seem, and his limited game action that happened this year. Kyle McCord is already in Syracuse. Funnily enough, was on the sideline when they lost to Marshall, I do believe. Jarrod,
without a quarterback, they did not have a quarterback.
We talked about that last week. So Missouri, how well can they do against Ohio State's defense, which has proven to be very tough. Penn State found that out the hard way. Georgia, Florida State. I don't know if any players are left to play that game besides Carson Beck. All of Florida State's opting out because
or transferring. Their backup quarterback transferred as well.
Yeah, so they're going to be down to their third string quarterback. His name escapes me, but he was hot dog water against Louisville in the ACC championship game. No offense to him. He is a third string quarterback with a lot to prove. So a lot of room to grow there, but I don't think that much growth is going to happen in the month since the ACC championship game. And we roll into Monday, which is the Final Four. So, excuse me, the college football playoff. Can't say the Final Four.
Wrong college sport. Joe, and we'll record before those games on Monday. So, Joe, before we go, what bowl game outside of Penn State are you looking forward to between now and Saturday?
I will say, and I'm not just doing this to please Kevin, I think Arizona and Oklahoma is going to be very good. I think both teams are good. I know Oklahoma kind of fell off, but Arizona has had a surprisingly good year.
I knew
Both
about
Mike Howard.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't. I'm definitely a bandwagon on that one. Sorry.
Both high-powered offenses, and it feels like the Alamo Bowl is just always entertaining. Whether it's last year's game, Texas Washington, that ended up being a playoff game this year, which we're going to see. There's been some other ones. 2015 was when TCU fell behind 31-0 to Oregon and came back and won. So the Alamo Bowl was just one of those games where something pretty wild is going to happen, and I think that this is the perfect recipe for that type of game. And yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see it.
That about wraps it up for us this week. Our bowl preparations are done. We are now entering our travel day. Well, some of us are entering a travel day to head down to Atlanta, where we'll have even more content to come from the site of the Peach Bowl between Joe and myself once I arrive down south. But for Kevin Quigley and Joe Smeltzer, this has been Jarrod Prugar on the Lashing Out Podcast. We greatly appreciate listening. We'll catch you again after the bowl game on Saturday.